March 1944. The North Atlantic roars with storm and steel. Rain lashes the deck of the destroyer escort USS England. Waves rise like black walls. Sonar pings echo through the hull. Below, 200 feet under the surface, Japanese submarine I-27 drifts silently. Its commander believes he's invisible. For years, submarines like his have ruled the oceans, striking convoys, then slipping away untouched. But tonight, something new hunts him. On the England's bow, sailors load 24 stubby rockets into a circular frame. No depth charges. No explosions yet. Just silence. Fire Hedgehog. The deck shudders. A spread of glowing projectiles arcs into the sea, vanishing in darkness. Seconds stretch. Then the ocean erupts. One impact. Then 6 more. The sonar man whispers, "We hit her, sir." And for the first time in the Pacific War, a Japanese submarine dies without ever hearing the weapon that killed it. This strange little launcher will change naval warfare forever, and in 12 days, it will destroy 7 submarines, rewriting everything Japan thought it knew about control of the sea. By 1943, the Pacific wasn't just blue water, it was a graveyard. Allied ships burned from Australia to the Aleutians. Convoys carrying men and supplies vanished without distress calls, leaving only oil slicks and floating debris. Japanese submarines were the ghosts behind those losses. The Imperial Navy saw them as precision instruments, long-range, stealthy, commanded by elite officers. One torpedo from a Type B sub could end a destroyer. One patrol could erase an entire convoy. To fight back, the Allies relied on the bluntest of tools, depth charges. Drums packed with TNT rolled off a ship's stern and set to detonate at guess depths. They were terrifying, but blind. A destroyer would drop them, lose sonar contact, and wait, engine silent, hoping the explosions found their mark. They rarely did. For every submarine destroyed, 5 escaped. Crews called it the underwater lottery. You listened, you prayed, and sometimes you heard air bubbles. Sometimes your own engines came apart from shock waves. The problem wasn't courage. It was physics. Sonar could pinpoint a sub's location only while the ship was quiet. The moment depth charges dropped, the ship lost contact. They were fighting an invisible enemy and blindfolding themselves in the process. In 1942, deep inside British naval research labs, a group of engineers began to ask the forbidden question: what if we could strike without breaking contact? The answer became Project Hedgehog, a weapon as strange as its name. Instead of massive barrels of explosives, it used dozens of small contact bombs, each shaped like a stubby rocket, fired forward rather than drop behind. They didn't explode by timer. They detonated only when they hit a submarine's hull. To the brass, it looked ridiculous. A porcupine of tubes bolted to the bow of a destroyer. To physicists, it was elegant. It allowed continuous sonar tracking, and its explosives were packed just enough to puncture pressure hulls without tearing the ship, firing them apart. A British captain joked, "It looks like something out of Frankenstein's laboratory." But the Admiralty approved a limited test. The first live trial shocked everyone. A training ship fired the new weapon at a captured German U-boat, hulk resting on the seafloor. Within seconds, 3 direct hits blew holes clean through the steel plating. One observer muttered, "God help whatever's inside when that happens at depth." When the Americans saw the data, they moved fast. By late 1943, U.S. engineers at the Naval Ordnance Plant in Louisville were producing Hedgehogs under license. Crews were skeptical. The contraption looked fragile and absurd, but one man believed. Rear Admiral Frederick Sherman wrote, "If it works even once, it will save more lives than any depth charge ever built." Still, it was untested in real war. Would the impact fuse function under pressure? Would sonar hold contact through a storm? Would sailors trust a weapon that made no noise? The Pacific would provide the answers, and the test would come sooner than anyone expected. In January 1944, a Japanese submarine stalked an Allied convoy near the Caroline Islands. The destroyer escort USS England was ordered to protect it. As dawn broke, sonar detected a faint echo, steady, distant, moving deep. The officer of the deck called the bridge. Possible subcontact, bearing 090. Commander C. A. Britain didn't hesitate. Maintain contact. Ready, Hedgehog. The crew glanced at each other. Few had ever fired outside of drills. Britain simply said, "Time to see if the scientists were right." The sonar room on USS England was dark, except for the eerie green glow of the scope. Every ping echoed like a heartbeat. Ping, ping, ping. The operator's voice trembled. "Target steady, sir. Depth 200 feet. Commander Britain leaned over the display. "That's no whale." Outside, waves crashed against steel. The destroyer's crew readied the new Hedgehog system for its first real hunt. The tubes, 24 of them, pointed forward, angled like a crown of thorns. One sailor muttered, "Looks like something we built out of spare pipes." Another replied, "Just hope it bites harder than it looks." Britain's order cut through the tension. "Fire." The Hedgehog's salvo hissed off the bow. No deafening blast like depth charges, just a whoosh, then silence. Every man on deck held his breath. The seconds dragged. 5, 10, 15. Then a muffled boom. Then another. Then a chain of explosions that rolled beneath the ship like thunder. In the sonar room, the operator shouted, "Direct hits!" A massive air bubble broke the surface. Then an oil slick. The sea turned black. "Subcontact lost, sir," said the sonar chief. "She's gone." They'd just sunk Japanese submarine I-16, a veteran hunter that had claimed Allied cargo ships across the Pacific. It took the Hedgehog less than 2 minutes. The crew stood in stunned silence. They'd trained for months, but no one expected the first real strike to work this perfectly. Britain finally spoke, half to himself. "It's like dropping lightning." What made it terrifying wasn't power. It was precision. Depth charges were blunt instruments. The Hedgehog was a sniper. Where depth charges blanketed an area in chaos, the Hedgehog aimed a single deadly truth. If you hit, the sub was finished. And because the bombs only exploded on impact, there was no wasted noise, no decoy blasts, no confusion. If the sailors heard detonations, it meant one thing. They'd made contact with steel. That simplicity gave crews something they'd never had before in anti-sub warfare: confidence. The after-action report spread like wildfire. Within a week, Allied command was buzzing. Some called it a miracle. Others, luck. Captain Britain was summoned for a debrief. One admiral asked, "Are you sure it wasn't just a depth charge?" Britain grinned. "Sir, we didn't drop any." The Navy ordered more Hedgehog installations immediately. By spring, destroyer escorts across the Pacific carried them on their bows, each a strange-looking weapon that sailors first mocked until they saw what it could do. But technology alone doesn't win wars. Someone had to believe in enough to use it under fire, to trust it while everyone else hesitated. That believer was the USS England's crew, a ship that would soon become legend. May 1944. The England and her sister ships formed a hunter-killer group in the Western Pacific. Their mission: intercept Japanese submarines resupplying garrisons in New Guinea and the Carolines. It was supposed to be routine patrol duty. But that patrol would become one of the most astonishing streaks in naval history. At dawn on May 18th, sonar picked up a contact. Faint, steady, bearing north. Lieutenant William Cole, the England sonar officer, turned to Britain. "Could be another I-boat, sir." Britain nodded once. "Bring us the attack course." Hedgehog batteries ready. The ship turned hard to port. Every man knew what was coming. Cole called out distances. "Range 800 yards. Steady closing. Ready to fire." Britain's hand hovered over the intercom. Fire. 24 spiked charges leapt into the sea, arcing in silence. Seconds later, the ocean beneath them roared. For explosions. Then 5 more. The men on deck saw water erupt like a geyser. The sonar scope flashed once, then flatlined. Another submarine gone. RO 106. Destroyed before it even knew it had been found. The Hedgehog had now claimed 2 confirmed kills in less than 4 months. And this was only the beginning. The U.S. Navy realized something extraordinary. The weapon's silence, its lack of spectacle, was its genius. While depth charges terrified crews with their violence, the Hedgehog whispered its lethality. Quiet kills, one sailor called them. You never hear her die, just the sea goes still. Reports from captured Japanese radio log confirmed it. Messages from sub-bases abruptly stopped mid-sentence. Crews vanished without distress calls. The Imperial Navy had no idea how their most advanced hunters were being picked off one by one. They suspected radar. They suspected new sonar codes. But they never guessed the truth, that their steel predators were dying to a weapon small enough to fit in a pickup truck. For the crew of the England, each victory brought equal parts pride and unease. They were doing their job, but every time they saw oil rise to the waves, they knew hundreds of men had gone down in seconds. One seaman wrote home, "When a Hedgehog hits, the sea coughs up air and fire. Then it's quiet again. You think about the men below. You wonder if they ever saw it coming." The weapon was efficient, too efficient, and war, as Allen later wrote in his diary, makes efficiency feel like guilt. But the orders were clear. Hunt the next sub. Because somewhere beyond the waves, Japan's silent killers were still moving, and the England streak had only just begun. The crew of the USS England had already seen the Hedgehog work. Twice. But what happened next would defy logic, statistics, even belief. May 1944. The Pacific shimmered under a haze of heat and salt. England joined a small task group of destroyer escorts, the George, the Raby, and the Spangler. Their mission: intercept Japanese supply subs ferrying reinforcements to isolated island garrisons. What they didn't know was that Japan had sent out 7 submarines, I-boats and RO-class, in quick succession. What followed would become one of the most incredible undersea hunts in naval history. May 18, 1944. Contact 1. Sonar picked up a faint echo 90 miles north of Manus Island. Range 1,200 yards. The sonar chief called out. Britain gave a sharp nod. Bring her around. Attack course 085. Hedgehog ready. The England's bow rose and fell through the swell. The deck crew braced for impact. Fire. The Hedgehog spat 24 glowing trails into the sea. Silence. Then boom, 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 boom. The sonar display went dead. The sea erupted in an oily geyser. Submarine I-16 destroyed. It was over in seconds. 4 days later, May 22nd, the task group picked up a new contact. Another sub, RO-106. Once again, England closed in. Another Hedgehog salvo. Another cluster of detonations. Gone. The sailors started whispering superstition. The ship was haunted, guided by something more than sonar. But Britain stayed focused. Luck's for gamblers, he told his XO. We got science. May 23rd. Another contact. RO-104, destroyed within hours. By now, the crew wasn't cheering. They were stunned. 3 submarines in 6 days. No Allied ship had ever done that. Yet sonar operators barely had time to process it before another signal appeared on the scope. May 24th, RO-116. The England's crew moved like clockwork. Ping. Lock. Fire. Explosions. Silence. Another kill. At night, the ship's mess hall went quiet. One sailor wrote in his diary, "We used to call it hunting. Now it feels like execution." Even so, the orders didn't stop. Intelligence confirmed more subs en route to New Guinea. The group turned north again. May 26, RO-108. This one was trickier. The sub dove deep, twisting through thermal layers to confuse sonar. Hours passed. The crew was exhausted, eyes red from sonar glare. Then a faint ping, steady and rhythmic. Britain leaned over the sonar chief. "That's her. Don't lose it." The Hedgehog fired. 16 seconds later, boom. RO-108, gone. 5 submarines in 8 days. Word reached Admiral Ernest King at Pacific Fleet Command. He read the report twice and said, "Find out what that ship's drinking. Send it to everyone." But the streak wasn't over. May 27th, RO-105. This one fought back. The England, Raby, and George pursued the contact for nearly a full day. Each time the Hedgehog fired, the sub evaded, slipping beneath thermoclines, hiding in sonar shadows. It was the longest hunt yet, and the most dangerous. Finally, after 8 hours, the sonar man whispered, "She's turning back on us." Britain's eyes narrowed. "Then we've got her." Another salvo fired. Then nothing. Minutes stretched. The men waited, silent. Then the ocean roar would blast that lifted the ship's bow. When the smoke cleared, a massive air bubble rose. RO 105 had been vaporized. 6 submarines down. By now, even the skeptics at Allied Command were stunned. Reporters scrambled for information, but details were classified. The official communiques simply said, "Destroyer escort USS England. Continuing operations with notable success." Notable success was an understatement. May 31st, RO 107. The final kill. It was almost anticlimactic. After 12 days of near-constant battle, England's crew performed their ritual perfectly. Sonar contact. Target locked. 24 bombs. Detonation. Oil on the surface. Silence below. 7 submarines. 12 days. No destroyer. No fleet. No navy in history had ever achieved such a streak. Not even Germany's famed U-boat hunters. When England docked at Manus Island, sailors staggered ashore, sleepless, wired, stunned by what they'd done. A correspondent asked one gunner, "What's it feel like to be part of history?" The sailor just stared at the sea and said, "Feels like we ran out of targets." Back in Washington, Admiral King sent a message to the crew. There will always be an England. But behind the victory, a question lingered. How had one small ship done what entire fleets could not? Was it luck? Ingenuity? Or had the Hedgehog truly changed the psychology of war beneath the waves? The answer would come not from the Americans, but from Tokyo. When the reports first reached Tokyo Naval Headquarters, no one believed them. 7 submarines, gone. Not damaged, not missing, erased. Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita read the intelligence summary twice before slamming it on his desk. "Impossible," he snapped. "No single ship could do this." But it was true. Every week in May 1944, another Japanese sub had failed to check in. No survivors. No radio distress calls. No debris found beyond drifting oil slicks. The Imperial Navy, once proud of its undersea fleet, was unraveling. Before the war, Japan's submarine corps had been the envy of the Pacific. Long-range hunters that prowled thousands of miles from home. They carried elite officers, top engineers, and a reputation for near invisibility. Now, those same officers were vanishing into silence. In one internal memo, an intelligence officer wrote, "Enemy destroyers appear to possess a new weapon. It fires rapidly and kills with certainty. Our boats die without sound." No one wanted to admit it, but morale was collapsing. Crews began whispering a new name among themselves, the Silent Death. In the cramped quarters of submarine base Kure, veteran Commander Lieutenant Haruki Nishida listened to the rumors. 7 in 12 days, one younger officer said, "It's the same ship. They call it England." Nishida scoffed, "One ship cannot defeat the sea." But that night, as he studied his charts, he paused and crossed himself. Even the fearless were starting to believe. At sea, Hedgehog attacks changed everything about how submariners thought. Before, they'd been able to outweight depth charges, counting the seconds until the blast ended, then slipping away. But the Hedgehog offered no rhythm, no warning. It struck silently, then detonated only when it touched you, a survivor from a later sinking. One of the few Japanese sailors ever rescued from a Hedgehog strike. Described a moment. "We heard nothing, only the sound of metal screaming. Then water everywhere." That quote spread among Allied crews like legend, proof that the Hedgehog didn't just win battles, it broke nerves. In Tokyo, Admiral Shigeyoshi in no way ordered an immediate investigation. Engineers combed through intercepted reports, sonar patterns, and survivor testimony. Their conclusion chilled the room. The Americans possess an anti-submarine weapon which strikes without loss of contact. Probability of survival minimal. They called it Kabutsu, the monster, but by the time they began developing countermeasures, it was already too late. The Hedgehog wasn't just a weapon, it was a doctrine. U.S. escorts now hunted in packs, armed with sonar, so advanced it could track submarines through thermal layers. Every convoy route that once belonged to Japan was now a trap. The change wasn't just tactical, it was psychological. For the first time, Japanese commanders began recalling their submarines, reassigning them to defensive patrols closer to home waters. The offensive undersea campaign, the one that had terrorized the Indian and South Pacific, was effectively over. Historian Samuel Eliot Morison later wrote, after May 1944, Japanese submarine operations were no longer warfare. They were suicide. The Hedgehog had turned the deep ocean from a sanctuary into a grave. Still, the Imperial Navy refused to acknowledge total defeat. They increased training hours, adjusted dive tactics, even experimented with decoys. Small sonar reflectors meant confuse Allied destroyers. None of it worked. Every attempt to mimic Allied sonar technology failed under resource shortages. Japan simply didn't have materials or computing precision required to match U.S. radar and acoustic systems. One surviving memo from a Naval Research Bureau summarized the hopelessness. The Americans no longer chase our submarines. They wait for them. For sailors aboard the USS England, the war went on, but something had changed. Each time their sonar pinged against the depths, there was no thrill, no celebration, only a heavy quiet. They'd seen the weapon's efficiency firsthand, how it left nothing behind but oil and silence. A radio operator wrote home, "We used to fear the ones below us. Now I think they fear themselves." By the end of 1944, Japan's once proud submarine fleet was effectively neutralized. From 128 operational boats, fewer than 40 remained. Most were trapped in coastal waters, afraid to venture into the open Pacific. The Hedgehog didn't just sink steel, it drowned Japan's faith in invisibility. And for the Americans, that realization was profound. They had turned fear itself into a weapon. But one question lingered, whispered among Allied crews. If one small ship and one strange weapon could break the enemy's will, what would war look like when machines did the same to men on land and in air? When the war finally began to wind down in 1945, much of the Pacific was quiet again, but not peaceful. The silence of the ocean now carried ghosts. For every Allied ship that steamed safely across the waves, there was a wreck resting below. Testimony to the years when submarines ruled the deep, and scattered among them were the remains of the once mighty Imperial Japanese submarine fleet, now reduced to rust and memory. The Hedgehog had not just helped end that dominance. It had redefined how wars would be fought beneath the sea. By war's end, Allied statistics revealed a staggering truth. Over 270 enemy submarines had been destroyed by Hedgehog attacks. Each one represented a crew that never returned, a convoy that reached its destination, a shift in momentum that quietly altered history. The weapon's brilliance was its simplicity. No engines, no guidance systems, no explosions unless it earned one. It was a perfect balance of science and instinct, a weapon that rewarded skill rather than luck. The post-war U.S. Navy called it the thinking man's tool. To sailors, though, it was more personal. They called it the Avenger, because for them it was justice, a precise counter to the invisible killers who had haunted Allied convoys since 1941. But the Hedgehog story didn't end in 1945. It became the blueprint for an entire generation of anti-submarine weapons. Post-war Britain introduced the Squid and later the Limbo. The Americans evolved the concept into Weapon Alpha, Mousetrap, and eventually the guided rocket torpedoes of the Cold War. Every sonar-guided depth weapon built since has carried the Hedgehog's DNA, the idea that certainty, not volume, wins battles. The technology spread even further. Soviet engineers studied captured Allied schematics after the war. Within a decade, Hedgehog-inspired launchers appeared on Warsaw Pact destroyers. In an ironic twist, the weapon once built to defeat Imperial Japan helped shape the next global standoff. But statistics and engineering can't explain the Hedgehog's deeper impact. The psychological scar it left. The sailors who used it never forgot the eerie quiet before the hits. That pause between firing and detonation, those endless seconds, forced them to confront what war really was. One veteran later said, "The Hedgehog didn't roar. It whispered, and that whisper stayed with you." Many of them carried that silence for the rest of their lives. The destroyer escort USS England, the ship that started it all, was decommissioned in 1945, worn down by relentless operations. But its legend endured. Naval cadets still study its streak. 7 submarines in 12 days, an achievement unmatched in maritime history. In Japan, the aftermath was quieter, more tragic. Families of lost submariners received no explanations, only the final word, missing in action. For decades, the Imperial Navy buried the details. But in 1970, Japanese divers located the wreck of Aro 105, one of the subs sunk by the England. Inside, the crew's bones were still at their stations. The Hedgehog's impacts had torn to the hull so fast that they'd never had a chance to surface. Even in death, the silence remained. In documentaries decades later, historians call the Hedgehog the weapon that ended the age of shadows. It turned the ocean, once the predator's domain, into a battlefield of parody. For the first time, humans had built a machine that could outthink the deep, and maybe that's why its story still resonates. Because in that moment, between science and survival, we see what war really demands of invention. Not rage, not glory, but clarity. A simple question whispered through history. How far must we evolve to outsmart our own fear? The Hedgehog answered that question in steel and silence. And though the ocean has long since swallowed the evidence, the echoes remain. A sonar ping, a pause, a burst of light beneath the waves. That was the sound of a turning point, the moment technology overtook terror. And from that day forward, the hunters of the deep would never again swim unchallenged. In war, brute force fades, but innovation endures. The Hedgehog proved that a small idea, fired from a humble deck, could shift the tide of nations. If you want more untold stories of the weapons, warriors, and turning points that redefined World War II, subscribe for the next chapter, because sometimes the loudest victories are the quietest ones.